Hi, I'm Alyssa, and this is my story Robe final. This is my completed story Robe. This is my story Robe legend, but I'll go more into detail on this in the following slides. This symbol is a hand representing sharing love, plants, and knowledge with others. The roots that are in the shape of a heart represent the love we should have for both plants and each other. I drew this symbol to remind me of the importance of plants. In the YouTube video, The Honorable Harvest by Bioneers, I learned about the importance of plants and how they give us everything that we need. She reminds me that they are a living thing and that we should be asking for permission before we harvest them. I think most people don't think too much about where our food comes from, but after this course, I've realized the importance of them and the need to better look after them. This symbol shows a European settler holding a flag and a native man. This is a representation of colonization when the European settlers took over the native land. This was important for me as I learned about the doctrine of discovery and how the Europeans took over the native land. They basically pushed out and controlled the natives and their land by introducing new laws and culture. This symbol shows a native child crying over top of a residential school to indicate the sadness that some native children had to go through while at school. It is so sad to know that these children were emotionally, physically, mentally, and sexually abused, not to mention the children that were burned in an incinerator and buried. Since this did not happen that long ago, some of the children who were impacted are still alive today. I thought this was important to remember. Knowing that these occurrences happened recently and that schools were able to get away with mistreating kids in this way is very saddening. I drew a tree as my symbol to represent the tree metaphor described by Lupi and Wen in the reading Understanding Indigenous Health Inequalities Through a Social Determinants Model. They explain the different social determinants of health and how they affect Indigenous people's health. The tree metaphor is composed of three components: the roots, which are the structural determinants, the trunk, which are the core determinants, and the stem, which are the health activities, employment or income, education, and food insecurity. I think these are all so important for the health of Indigenous people, and if one determinant lacks, others will lack as well, resulting in poor health. It makes me think more in depth about the impact certain changes in policies or infrastructure, for example, can have on the health of Indigenous people and how these certain changes can all relate to each other. This symbol symbolizes the Indian status card, but I drew the face as scribbles to indicate how the Indian status shouldn't be used to identify who an Indian is or is not. Before this course, I had thought that all Indians had an Indian status card, but I learned that is not true. I learned how much the government has control over the Indians as well. I also didn't know that there was a membership, which is different than having a status card. Also, Indians that don't have a status because they lost it or didn't qualify are still Indigenous, but just don't have a status. It seems rather complicated to me, and something where if the Indians had more control over it, it would be more streamlined and make more sense to them. This symbol I drew is an equal sign going through a heart. The equal sign represents equality, as healthcare should be the same throughout all populations in Canada. The heart represents good health and how everyone should be provided proper health care in order to have good health. I learned that Indigenous people don't always have access to good health care like other people do, or if they need certain health care, they may have to commute, which means they have to leave their language, their culture, beliefs, and family. This would be similar to asking me to go get healthcare in an Indigenous community. It would be more difficult, and they would probably do things differently that may be against what I believe or what I'm used to. I think that is why it's important for Indigenous people to have better access to healthcare and for healthcare professionals to understand Indigenous culture and beliefs so we can better care for them. This symbol shows a Native person speaking out hearts, which represents language playing a factor for a healthy life. Natives speaking their language is crucial for their health. This is something most people don't really think about. When Native people can speak their language, they feel a better sense of inclusion by engaging in activities that are part of their culture with others. Their language also connects them to their land and food, which also supports their culture. I feel this is important to understand so we can allow them to continue to speak their language whenever possible. For my symbol, I drew Indigenous feathers in the province of Alberta, indicating that Alberta acknowledges Indigenous people. The hearts represent the care that Alberta has for Indigenous people, and the equal symbols represents equality that the province of Alberta is working towards. This symbol represents the roadmap to wellness model that Alberta Health Services created. I know they have their own symbol, but I wanted to make my own as a reminder to myself that AHS is doing things to achieve better health equality towards Indigenous people. I am happy to have learned this because I know that Indigenous people have different healing and wellness traditions to support their health. If I'm going to be a nurse in Alberta, I feel this is important for me to understand so that I can help Indigenous people in a way that is respectful to their beliefs and culture. How my understanding of Indigenous health has evolved. Over the term, I have learned a lot about Indigenous health. I've previously taken courses that focus on Indigenous health before, but I feel in this course I got a better understanding of things that I didn't know, like the Native Act and how much the government has control over Native people. I feel I have a better understanding of Indigenous people and how certain things can impact their health. Things that you wouldn't necessarily think would impact their health, like speaking their own language, and how colonialism has affected Native people's health. I was also not aware that AHS has plans in place to help Indigenous people, which I like knowing since I will more than likely be working for AHS in the future. Ongoing impacts colonialism has on Indigenous people's health. I feel there's so much to say about this, but in summary, colonialism has impacted Indigenous people's health in various ways, such as poverty, which can mean they can't afford healthy food or health services, inadequate living conditions, which can cause a higher risk for illness, access to food resources, so limited access to food resources can result in malnutrition, loss of land that can impact their living conditions, which then affects their health. Access to health care can obviously result in not getting the care they need, and racism that can affect their mental health. All of these things can cause poor health for Indigenous people. Ways to disrupt anti-Indigenous racism in healthcare. Provide more funding to put towards better healthcare for Indigenous communities, including healthcare that is easily accessible to them. Make more people aware of Indigenous culture and what Indigenous people may need that is different than the rest of the population. Have more programs in place that benefit Indigenous people's health and can give them more knowledge about healthy living. Better infrastructure in place that can provide Native communities with better quality water. Bottom line, all people in Canada should have access to the same kind of healthcare and services. It shouldn't matter where you live or what culture you celebrate. I feel that the more people are aware of these things, the more action will be done to eliminate Indigenous racism in healthcare and in general. Importance of this as a future nurse. Everything that I've learned throughout this course I feel is important to know as a future nurse because it makes me more aware of what Indigenous people go through, their culture, their traditions, and the challenges they face in everyday life. Knowing all of this can alter the way that I do things to provide better health care to them. It will also help me realize that some of the things I usually do, I shouldn't do when I treat Indigenous people, as they may not agree with it or believe in.